So the weirdest piece of journalism of the news cycle was in a Politico story that led with an important news that Scott Bessent had gone down to Mar-a-Lago this weekend and lobbied the president, as Sean said, to move towards negotiation. Buried in that story is a paragraph that says Trump himself is calling people saying, "Don't worry, this thing's going to end soon, and we're gonna make deals." So it seems that's the direction we're headed. Here is the aforementioned Treasury Secretary. This would be 104 back to back 105 on Squawk Box this morning. Fewer surrogates out than yesterday, but the Treasury Secretary, who's moved kind of front and center in guiding the policy now to some extent, was on Squawk Box. Here he is.
The president said yesterday with Netanyahu, quote, that these tariffs can be permanent tariffs and there can also be negotiations. Yeah. We also had Peter Navarro, as Becky mentioned, and you just talked about, saying that the whole goal of this is to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. And then there's been the discussion of trying to raise revenue as a function of the tariffs. All of those different ideas, to some degree, oddly enough, are at odds with each other. I'm trying to understand from your perspective whether these really are negotiations, they're not negotiations, what success at the end of the day actually looks like.
If we put up a tariff wall, the ultimate goal would be to bring jobs back to the U.S., but in the meantime, we will be collecting substantial tariffs. As I've said, I believe on this show that if we're successful, tariffs would be a melting ice cube in a way, because you're taking in the revenues as the manufacturing facilities are built in the U.S., and there should be some level of symmetry between the taxes we begin taking in with the new industry from the payroll taxes as the tariffs decline.
All right, a little inside baseball history because it's important now. Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick vied to be Treasury Secretary. Lutnick lost out and became Commerce Secretary, but he negotiated to be named Tariff Czar as Commerce Secretary, which is not normal, but he got that. What we're seeing in the last day, and that appearance signifies it, is the Bessent point of view. This is not about revenue. This is about leverage for greater deals, is ascendant and appears to be where this is headed, which will calm markets. Bessent's fellow millionaires and billionaires would much prefer to see him out there. And the Wall Street Journal has a savage hit job on Howard Lutnick, saying the president thinks he's around too much, nobody likes him, everybody thinks he needs to stay off TV, etc. So, Sean, what is going on here between Lutnick, Trump, and Bessent?
I think you described it. There's a sense that look, when I was at the U.S. Trade Rep's office, we would constantly do battle with not so much USDA, because Mike Johans is a great guy, but like Commerce, and then the Secretary, and then Treasury, because, Paulson was a very, very esteemed businessman. He had a lot of connections, so people would call him. That's life, right? They kind of go, great, I know Hank Paulson, I'm going to call him. And there was always some tension because we wanted to, we handled trade, we handled a bunch of that stuff, but people wanted to call Hank Paulson because he was who he is. And I think part of this, if you're Lutnick and Bessent, is stay in your lane, right? This is what I do. This is what you do. And I think that there's a little bit of tension. Both of them are non-Washington guys. They're not politicians. And I think that they, both have very strong styles and sense of personality. And you're going to see this. And I think it's played out. You can see, not just that Wall Street Journal story, right? That was Dawsey. Last week was the New York Post and Politico. Like, there is clearly I'm going to show you. You want to see what happens when you go into my sandbox? I kick you out real quick. And I think this is going to be an interesting thing. When you're new, I don't think you fully appreciate that it's not just the secretary and the principal that you're dealing with, but all the people underneath them come ready to bear. And I will say this, I don't know Howard's team as well. And again, I'm not implying anything. I'm just saying, like, when you look at Scott's team over at Treasury, without getting into names, because I don't want to, they're not there, but they are some experienced fighters. And
They're ninjas with nunchucks, is what they are.
no, they're the nunchucks that have the cushions on them so that what
No,
was
no,
that?
they've got razor blades on both
It
sides.
doesn't leave a bruise.
Yeah.
They know how to fight like that. And I'm just saying, like, if you're gonna play this game, you better be ready to play.
The only thing I'd say before Dan gets in is you're right. I think everything he said is right, except remember, as I said, Trump gave Lutnick that lane. He said, you're in charge of tariffs. So he could say he's playing in his lane. He's just not playing in his lane in a way that other people seem to
Well, but
appreciate.
also I think that there is, look, we've said this. I haven't done a single interview in 96 hours where somebody hasn't said to me, what's the message? Is it, and I'm
Right.
talking even from MAGA world, right? People are saying, hey, I want to be
Yeah.
with the president, but
Yeah.
are we fighting for reducing the deficit or are we fighting for
Right.
market access?
Right.
And and the problem isn't, necessarily Trump, it's you've got different people going out there and saying, this is the thing. I will say, to your point about reduced surrogates, I would pay attention to who goes out. There's going to be a lot more discipline from what I believe as far as who does what interviews.
Yeah. Dan.
I think Bessant's like Michael and Lutnick's like Sonny in The Godfather. I mean, Lutnick's just, he gets very hot quickly. He's full of bravado and speaking all over the place. And Bessant is just the quiet, measured person. I mean, half of what he said in that CNBC interview was absurd, but it's calming. It sounds somewhat logical. And I think, the fact that he went to Florida, it didn't get out initially. He is trying to move Trump in private. Smart, right? I mean, that's how you try to deal with them. So, and I'll also just add, by the way, shout out to the Democratic Party, who has actually for the second week in a row played an issue fairly well. They have not inserted themselves with like Trump derangement syndrome, that you don't have the squad and others screaming. You got people like Andy Bashir, Whitmer, Polis saying, this is how it impacts our state. Here are the companies that benefit from trade. Here is how this hurts us. It's getting into a few stories, but they're letting Republicans circular firing squad and hang themselves. Shout out to the party.
And it's not just the stories. We talked a little bit about this from Bill Ackman yesterday. He obviously walked it back a little last night in terms of the personal nature, but the people are pointing their finger at Howard, right? Because if you're not that, but more because you're the guy that's championing this. And so when they're calling President Trump, they're saying, I'm hearing your guys say the following. And I think the way that Scott's playing this is beautiful because when you want to talk to Trump and have a conversation with him about a policy that's divergent from where he is, you don't do it in public. You don't do it with 18 people in the room. You say, can I meet with you privately? I have an idea. I know where your goal is. I think blah, blah, blah. But and I think that Scott has handled this really smart because he's not the guy that's out there owning it.
Right. So Trump 101, you got to be in the room. Part of why Bessant got the job he wanted and others, including Lutnick, didn't, is because he went to Mar-a-Lago and camped out during the transition. Howard was there also because he was running the transition. But other people who didn't get big jobs they wanted didn't invest the time. Friday night, or Thursday rather, when Trump flew down to Florida, you saw Lutnick standing on Air Force One in the shot as Trump talked to the pool. And Bessant, unbeknownst until it was reported this morning, flew down separately and, as Sean said, met with the president and had his influence. Millionaires and billionaires, for the most part, would prefer that Bessant drive this policy rather than Lutnick. Dan has correctly pointed out that there's an incredible story, much of it playing out on Twitter, taking place in a war within the party, including a lot of finance and tech people who supported Donald Trump for president, but are not happy with this policy.